Hello and welcome back to the Boropolis podcast. This episode is going to be our review of the season that has been and gone. I've just described it before we started recording as the end of season awards. We're not really in awards attire and there's not too much to celebrate, but there is plenty to discuss. I think, to be honest, rather than going back to Coventry, we ultimately just decided let's just erase that from kind of our memories and not do a podcast last week and then just tackle the important stuff, answer some of the bigger questions about where Boro are and what Boro are going to do moving forwards. And to be honest, Nathan, I feel like we've recorded this episode already because driving back from Coventry last week, we, in your car, analysed what's gone wrong, what needs to change, some of the good moments this season. And I think, to be honest, in that car journey, we were both under the assumption that probably come Tuesday, Wednesday, we probably know one way or another, are we going to have Michael Carrick as our head coach next season? And, rumours started to build early on in the week, Tuesday morning, that we were going to get some kind of announcement. And there was a few articles saying pressure was building and whatnot. I think kind of the announcement, or I guess piece from the local media, which was a briefing from the club, was, to me, a little bit unexpected. But yeah, it was somewhat of a shock that it wasn't a yes, we're going with Michael Carrick, or no, he's been relieved of his duties. It was, there's going to be a thorough review and there is also going to be no knee-jerk reactions. Now, I think certainly from the words and phrases that have been used in both articles from the Echo and the Gazette, the club are kind of leaning towards keeping Carrick, but there's a few sort of stipulations where, from both sides, I'm sure points will be shared, and from that, they'll decide what's going to be the best way moving forwards. But yeah, just initially, Nathan, your take on kind of the noises that we've heard early on this week, and I guess that the situation that Middlesbrough are in, given that a lot of other clubs have already acted and kind of moved on from their managers.
Yeah, I think firstly, it's a point to say that we are usually a club that acts quite late with retained lists and other things that go on post-season. Our retained list wasn't till 2 weeks after the season ended last season. After the week since the season has ended, I'm sort of expecting that we won't hear from the club until middle of next week, if not the end of next week on that. So I think that's important to say that they do usually take their time anyway in sort of releasing things post-season. But with a manager, you're sort of expecting that would possibly be different. It would sort of be a yes or no immediately, or very close to immediately in the aftermath of Saturday, not making the playoffs as we all sort of thought that we wouldn't. And yeah, I think that what they have done so far is bided time a little bit, possibly to see what other championship clubs do in terms of there might be a manager that's currently in a job in this division or in another division, a different club, maybe abroad, that they quite fancy, and they're sort of waiting for all the divisions to end perhaps before making their decision with the manager and what they're going to do. So it is a little bit of an interesting one for me that they haven't pulled the trigger already on what they're going to do, whether it's keep him or get rid. But I am a little bit, I'm in two minds because I think that you do need stability. And what Carrick gives you is stability. He's been here for 2.5 seasons now. And it's clear that he's got some flaws, but at the same point, it is clear that he has been sold up the river at times with a couple of the decisions that has been dealt his way, with losing key players at important times at the end of seasons or mid seasons, in Lat's case, in Rodgers' case the season prior. So I think that a review at the end of the season, which look, it's it's going to take place at any club. It doesn't matter if they finished first and the review is, well, we did really well this year, but the negative points may have been X, Y, and Z. But they were always going to take place. But what I do think is it is important for all sides, whether that's Gibson, Scott, Recruitment, Carrick, all need to explain what they thought went well and what they thought they could have improved on, and maybe taking a little bit of accountability in some sectors of that for why ultimately this season has failed in its aims of reaching the playoffs and being promoted to the Premier League.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a few different things to kind of go at from the briefing, at least from especially Craig's piece that he done in the Gazette. He put together, it was kind of a mix of his own thoughts and I guess a little bit further detail in terms of, what was going to be on the table and what was going to be discussed, rather than, just pointing out that this review's taken place. And I think initially, the point that you make, when I first saw the news, I thought this is just basically a biding time, a bit of a sort of tool to use to weigh out potentially legalities, potentially replacements, and potentially sort out different details that are basically contractual rather than anything else. And actually behind the scenes, maybe a decision's already been made. Then I read the further kind of articles that come alongside the initial briefing. And I think it's quite clear to see that actually, at least from the noises in both pieces, of course, both pieces I'm referring to are Dom's in the Echo, and also it was discussed in the You Are My Boro podcast, and also Craig's kind of briefing and information that he's included in the Gazette articles. But just from assessing both of them, I think what has become apparent to me, at least, is that actually, and I'm reading between the lines here, I think sacking Carrick is kind of bottom of the eventualities list. The thing that they least want to do is part ways with Michael Carrick. Then I think the next kind of solution, if you want to call it that, would be in terms of the coaching staff, because yes, there's a conversation to be had about recruitment, but ultimately fans want accountability and visible changes that we can see. So whether that is a changing of the manager or head coach, or a change in personnel behind the scenes in terms of what we're going to see on the touchline next season, whether that be moving on existing staff or potentially bringing new names in, or existing experience that is all like currently outside of the football club. So I think that's another sort of solution where there's been whispers and kind of points that have alluded to, yes, Carrick may stay, but something within his coaching staff and within that group needs to change, whether that's outgoing or incoming. And then also there's kind of, I guess, off the pitch issues. So recruitment, injuries, and there's so much to get at, really. I think we made our main feelings clear in the last podcast. To be honest, we were pretty brutally honest. So for anyone that hasn't listened to that, that was almost a review in itself. We barely even spoke about the Norwich game. We spoke about kind of what's gone wrong, because at that point we decided, you know what, like, it's not going to happen, and ultimately we were proven right. Not that we're messiahs by any means. I think everyone went to Coventry expecting the result, and that eventual confirmation, I guess, that Middlesbrough weren't going to make the playoffs. I think my criticism initially would come with the fact that, yes, there is going to be a review at any club, like you say, and it's important that you've mentioned that, whether you've done amazingly or you've completely failed. And ultimately this is, let's call it for what it is, it's a failure. The fact that Middlesbrough Football Club haven't at least achieved a place in the playoffs is failure for this football club and this group of players and management. But this isn't the feeling amongst fans, the kind of ongoing changing of the narrative between a little bit of a split in what's happened in January in terms of the noises from the recruitment side, how much of a say Carrick's had, and then also the kind of ongoing changing feeling amongst the fans that actually, I think the initial credit that Michael Carrick had in his corner from his first half season in charge and the complete turnaround from him taking over from Chris Wilder, and even last season, to be fair, a lot of the circumstances, especially the injury front, went against him. And to finish outside of the playoffs, I don't think our squad was good enough to finish in the playoffs last season. And I think he managed it quite well. There was still obvious gaps in his skill set that I would say were apparent, which have continued this season, which is still alarming. But then it gets to this season. And as I say, what's perhaps not annoyed me, but has made me think what was really the point, or what is the point of this review, is all of what's going to be discussed. They aren't new issues. It wasn't like, we were in the driving seat going into the final day, or even the final few weeks of the season, and then it was a freak run of results and we've ended up outside of the playoffs, and you kind of think, where do we go from here? Because everything was going so well. We kind of knew this was going to happen. So even in terms of injuries, that's been an issue now for 2 years. According to the noises in that article, this is something the club have looked into, and it's something that they feel is not actually down to Carrick's training methods and kind of their programs. So that's potentially a deeper issue, whether it be with the training ground, whether it be the pitches. I don't know. I'm sure there's reasons and hypotheses that have been raised from the club as to why that's gone on. But that's an ongoing issue. So the fact that it's taking this long to really kind of say, right, what do we do to change this, is a little bit worrying to me. And the same goes for Carrick. Let's be honest here. When, after that Watford defeat, Steve Gibson come out unofficially and said, he's my man, I've got loads of trust in him, I feel like this football club is better off going forward with Michael Carrick than making a knee-jerk reaction and kind of going from one identity to a different one, to an older manager to a younger manager. We've known for a long time, and since Kieran Scott, spoke previously about that, basically his job, he wouldn't be doing his job if he wasn't already looking at replacements. And the idea was, because of Kieran Scott's role in the football club, that if we were to make a change in terms of personnel for the head coach, that there wouldn't need to be a whole restructuring. It would basically be someone that may have different ideas to Carrick, may have a slightly different play style, but ultimately, the recruitment was separate, and therefore the manager was almost interchangeable rather than a Pulis to a Woodgate, let's say. Now, this kind of ongoing review, and it might just be my anger at missing out on the playoffs, and anyone that listens to this podcast will know that I personally feel that we should have made a change earlier. I don't know. I think when you fail as a football club and spend the money that we have, it's a little bit naive to think that fans won't want obvious accountability. And it's not just to say, your fault, Michael Carrick, this is all down to you, because it's not. And we'll get into the reasons why, and that we've discussed all season. But to then, we might get that, but the briefing and the statement just felt a little bit like, we're going to push this out a little bit to test the waters, give you some kind of little tidbits about, we're probably going to keep Carrick. These are the reasons why potentially we think it's a good thing. It's going to bide us a little bit of time, and almost 2 weeks down the line, when the anger is not right up here because we've just seen Coventry celebrating against us again, that we'll say, we're going to continue with Carrick, but there'll be changes. And I think up until we see obvious changes, I don't know, I feel a little bit like it was all a bit of fluff, to be honest.
Yeah, as you say, it does feel like it is being used as a sort of delaying tactic, and perhaps it is delaying to wait for them to make a change, if they do, to complete this review and decide based on what they conclude. But also, and what I do think it is, as you say, is we're going to keep him, but we're going to just sort of delay that announcement or just not announce anything until further down the line. And then when it gets to June and or the end of June when the players are coming back to training, Carrick will be the one taking them and it'll all be forgotten about and it'll be planning for a new season. Now, I think that my opinions on Carrick have differed as the season has gone on. Going into the season, very confident in him, very confident in the squad. To put a run together like we did at the back end of last season, heading into this, knowing that we'd retained Rav Vandenberg, who was at one of our best players last season, Hayden Hackney and Lath, albeit late in the window, we've retained him. Retaining the three crown jewels at the time was massively important to us. And getting off to a relatively good start before the first international break, where I think we picked up 7 points out of 12, which is playoff form, really. So pleased with our start in the first month. And then in creeped the performances where we'd break the deadlock, complacency would kick in, and we'd draw 1-1 at home to Preston and draw games at home to Portsmouth that we shouldn't be drawing. And we should be seeing out those games. Moving on all the way up until that point in November when all of a sudden it just felt like we clicked and scored a ridiculous amount of goals, 15 goals in 3 games it was. And doing that against, okay, granted, poor opposition, but feeling that, okay, now this is Boro in their best form. If we can find not this level every week, possibly because it's just not sustainable, but finding a level slightly below this, which we can maintain as our mean, would be fantastic. And then we went on a run throughout December, throughout January, into February of just shit, really. And it all sort of lands and will stand out with that Sheffield Wednesday game of complacency at times, being 3-0 up, being scintillating in that first half, and just thinking, yeah, job's done. Coming out 15 minutes later, 3-3 and down to 10 men. Like, unbelievable. And in that, seeing the playing staff, the manager come out and say what he said in the aftermath of that, but also continuing with his management of the media throughout that spell of losing games throughout January. We played West Brom at home in the middle of January. We won that game, and he said, I don't see what all the fuss is about with the reaction to losing the previous couple of games. And from that point, we lost 6 in a row. 6 in a row from him making that stupid comment. So that made me think, first of all, him saying that, it made me think, are you sure that you can understand where the fans are coming from? Because we've been frustrated for 3 weeks. Granted, we've just put away a West Brom side who were in and around us in the table, finished above us in the end, but they were poor on the night. It wasn't necessarily Middlesbrough being fantastic that ripped West Brom apart.
Yeah.
We beat a West Brom side based on them being poor, them changing manager at the time with Mowbray coming in, and we had Ben Doak at the time that put one in the top corner from 25 yards out that wasn't a regular occurrence every week. So my sort of frustration started to creep in then, hearing him say that in the car on the way home that night. 6 defeats on the bounce, including home defeats to Sunderland, to Watford, who since the turn of the year, Watford picked up the lowest points out of any team in the division. And we got beat at home by Watford. The way in which Gibson came out, backed him, and then we still lost the next game against Bristol City, and it looked like, come on, like surely it's done now. And then we beat Stoke and Derby, who were both tragic. And all of a sudden it was like, flip the script. We're okay once again. He's bought himself a little bit of time. And we won games from then on unconvincingly. We should have been down 2-0 at home to Oxford at half time and weren't. And well, we shouldn't have won the game against Plymouth necessarily had it not been for a little bit of a fortuitous decision in our favour. And the way in which we spoke about last week that he's handled the media in the last month or so has been nothing short of disgusting, really, for someone that you'd expect would understand that they're talking to the fans rather than Mark Drury, who stood next to him at the time. And I think that those are my negative points on him. His management of the media, sometimes his frustrations with those asking the questions with him, it comes out at times. I think he's very, very naive at times to not make substitutions as early as he does. And I think that the positive points that I could say on him are I would rather watch Michael Carrick's football than Tony Pulis, Neil Warnock, Jonathan Woodgate. And we are still seeing signs of intricate passing. We just haven't got the personnel to be able to see these players at their full potential. I think that he has been hamstrung with the team and the squad that he has been given throughout the season as well. And I think that overall, my expectations, your expectations, the fan bases was brought around by overhyping this squad of players. Because if I look back,
But just to, like, I don't mean to be rude and cut you off by any means, but if we look at when the two one or I guess two of the big kind of issues that everyone's raised and probably what is going to be on the table in terms of this review is losing Latilaf was the end of the world and Ben Doak getting injured. Now, undoubtedly, they've had an effect, and especially the replacements as well. But if they were such huge misses, then I refuse to accept that first half of the season that we did underestimate us because we had both of those players fit and available. The bad run of form started when both of those were still in this Middlesbrough team.
yeah, it did. It did. However, the bad run started at Preston, right? You'd agree.
Yeah, I agree.
You'd
Yeah.
agree. Latilaf came off after 6 minutes at Preston because he just went, "Yeah, that's me." Played on the gate on the day to make him look like he was still part of the group, and immediately put his hand up. "Oh, I'm injured," and then 2 weeks later he's playing for Atlanta. And Doak we didn't see again after Preston. So I think that that one in itself, yeah,
No,
fair enough. They were
but
in, they were
were
in the squad, but they weren't.
but were we convincing even when it okay, yes, it got much worse, so fair enough.
Yeah,
But were we kind of good enough? I think what you said about Sheffield Wednesday, that was almost like the epicenter of everything that kind of
yeah.
went, what is going on with this Middlesbrough squad? And serious questions occurred. But if we say up until half time of that Sheffield Wednesday game, look, I don't know specifically, so I may be completely getting this wrong here, but I'm fairly certain we were in the playoffs at that point.
Yeah, we were.
So at that exact point, then I would say to, that first chunk of the season, then yes, okay, there was still question marks, but we weren't perhaps overestimating at the start of the season that this team could challenge for top two, maybe. But in terms of the minimum requirement, which we all agreed was the playoffs, then they were doing that at that point. So I don't think we were underestimating that group of players, but potentially the second group of players or the second iteration of the squad. But it's difficult because yes, they've had an impact, but I don't want to kind of write off the first half of the season and say, well, we were kind of off we're nuts to think that this Middlesbrough squad was not good enough at the beginning of the season.
Well, what I'd say to that is we came into the season and you'd say that we had a competent goalkeeper and Dieng was pathetic for
Yeah,
6 months.
I can't disagree with that.
We came in and we'd signed Ayling, who had a really good second half of last season, and Dijksteel. They're our two right backs, both been disgusting for most parts of this season. Dijksteel, I'll be glad to see out the door, and Ayling, I definitely wouldn't be against trying to shift him on if that was at all possible. So there's your two right backs. Vandenberg was our player of the season last year, has been nowhere near it this season, miles off it. We had Dale Fry, who, I mean, he hasn't pulled up any trees, has he? He's your bog standard championship centre half. George Edmondson looked well, all right for the first half of the season, you'd say. Signed him, looked miles off it. Clark looked like probably our best centre half in the first part of the season, and he was sold. You might make the point, but there'll be
No
people that
comment.
agree. Left backs, Borges been really was naff at left back for the first part of the
Yeah,
season.
he said himself, didn't he, that he couldn't acclimatise, in fairness.
Engel injured, and the Stoke League Cup game was the end of him. Your midfielders, I think, are your fair point. Like you can say, Hackney stood up to the challenge. We'll speak on him later. Morris looked like a really good signing. Was missing for 3 months in this period when we were looking unconvincing, but still in the playoffs. Barlasser, I don't think anyone's rating him anyway. But the fact
Yeah,
that
let's
the
just
fact
not even
the
talk
fact he
about
had to
it.
fill in for 2 months and was in and around that starting 11 goes to show that there is possibly the drop off between a Morris and a Barlasser was too big. Howson injured at times in the first part of the season and has filled in at centre half otherwise. I think where my sort of overhyping of players stands out particularly is thinking that Marcus Forss was an adequate replacement either as a centre forward or as a right winger for Dork or Whitaker. He has he's what did he end the season with? One goal away at Stoke.
Yeah, I think so.
So he got double figures 2 seasons ago, and that's what I was basing my opinion off. Got double figures 2 seasons ago. Last season was constantly injured, and then this season he's played a bit part role and scored one goal, and the other one is McGree. Can't remember the last time he played. Genuinely can't remember the last time he played or started a game for Middlesbrough. Which, if he like people in the fan base will say this, which I'm not necessarily disagreeing with, but when people say Riley McGree's one of our best players, granted, when fit, but it is caveated with when fit because he is never fit ever. And the fact that this came out in the press last week that he was injured once again after coming back into the squad in March and being on the bench, injured once again, missed out on squads again. And this is the first time in 2 years they've sent him to a specialist to figure out why he's made out of glass. It's
Yeah,
pathetic. It doesn't
yeah,
make any sense. But yeah, this is, as I've just gone through there, pretty much every position in the squad. Azaz, right, is your number 10. His replacement was Alex Gilbert, who can't get a game in League One. Micah Hamilton signed in the summer, shipped out to Stockport. I don't even know if he's in the squad for their playoff semi-final this afternoon. And then up front, okay, granted, you had two centre forwards who are top notch for the level. Latilath sold for a record fee. Great. You had him for the first half of the season. And even then, right, he ends on double figures for the season in the championship. And he went 10 without a goal. 10
yeah,
without a goal. So to get double figures in the time that he did, great. But you lose him, you lose Dork in January, and weirdly, because I'd seen people pulling it up a couple of weeks ago, the sort of if there was any disparity between the points accumulated between us without them two versus us with them, and there wasn't too much discrepancy. But I can tell you for a fact that we would have been a much better on the eye just a more enjoyable watch with those two players in the team rather than having to watch Whitaker off the right with no fullback bombing on past him to be able to help him out and to be able to provide some sort of a decoy or an option for him to either knock a pass up the line or dummy a pass up the line, shift inside and get his shot off like he does at Plymouth when he has Mumba flying past him. And watching Coventry last night, Van Evik flying past Sakamoto, their left-sided winger, their right-sided left-footed winger who wants to cut in all the time, and players are getting dragged away by the runs of Van Evik. We haven't got that because Dijksteel's just plodding along next to him. So we would have been a much better watch with those two in it. And I believe that what was the gap to the playoffs at the end? 3 points, maybe.
We finished 10th, though.
Don't matter. Doesn't matter where we finish. If you pick up,
If I'd have said to you, Middlesbrough will finish 10th on the first day of the season, you would have said, Chris, get lost.
I would have done. Hence why I'm saying my overhyping of the squad has led me down a garden path of thinking that yeah, we are due the playoffs, we are due the playoffs, we are due the playoffs. And in the end, from January onwards, I've had to watch Kelechi Iheanacho and Whitaker, who's horrendously out of form, interchanging positions, Marcus Force coming off the right and then playing the 10 when he comes off the bench. It has been a truly naff 4 months of football, and I'm glad to see the back of it, if I'm honest. And I think that there are, as I've just gone through there, the squad, there are so many deficiencies in this squad that stand out to me where I think there's players that are going to be leaving the football club, the loanees leaving the football club, players that are out of contract as well. And there's players that are still contracted to the football club where I'm thinking, we can't go into next season with you here as an option. We simply can't.
Yeah. Look, I do agree in the fact that there is like certain, especially squad players, like you say, the Gilberts of the world and Micah Hamiltons, that are just not good enough for a squad of players that are trying to be where Middlesbrough are trying to be. But I'll always just go back to the fact that, like I did last week, the best version of this Middlesbrough team, when we put six packs past Oxford, the first half against Sheffield Wednesday, those players were available at that point, got us in an amazing position, and we still threw games away. Watford, Norwich, Sheffield Wednesday, second half. There was deficiencies in the best version of this Middlesbrough squad. And albeit, like, yes, okay, but you've named Gilbert, who wasn't really getting minutes on the pitch. So if we're just going to go off the best version of Middlesbrough starting 11 that we had available for the first half of the season, Middlesbrough and Michael Carrick were still experts at throwing points away. And that's where I would concede that in the second half of the season, he has had limited options. But I think when better managers, or just, I guess, more tactically flexible, more pragmatic managers, what they may have done in the second half of the season is made a change. Has he varied away from 4-2-3-1 all season? You could say, yes, all right. You know, at times we've had an absolute crisis at centre-half, so he couldn't have gone to a back three. When Finazaz was dreadfully out of form, could he have not gone to a 4-3-3 in midfield? I think my frustration is the best version of this Middlesbrough team when it's performed at its best. And it's Michael Carrick's coaching as well has been good on the eye. But for a long time now, and I made this point in the last podcast, we haven't played good football for a long time. We haven't. We still have a really, really poor record at the Riverside. The defence was our Achilles heel last season, this season, and even in some parts of the season where we had a fit Tommy Smith. Ryan Giles, okay, yeah. we all know the discussion about that. But a fit Darragh Lenihan, Zach Steffen as well, who for the most part would be considered a good Middlesbrough keeper. I know he had a rick in him, but was a good standard of goalkeeper. And it still hasn't been fixed. There's been a continuation now. If in any football club, if there's a continuing pattern, you know, the old phrase of kind of doing the same things over and over and again and expecting different results, the defence hasn't been fixed. Last season, when we went on that really good run of form towards the back end, the sort of catalyst to having a strong end to the season was Michael Carrick actually being pragmatic and going, we need to shore things up at the back and try and build off that. We went to a back five last season, and at that point, I think in fairness, it was probably, I was Carrick's biggest supporter because I thought, right, he's recognised where the deficiencies are. He's shored us up a little bit. We've then seen a obvious on the eye change that has got us these positive results. This season, he's almost got this kind of arrogance, and it what we'll move on to as well in terms of changes that need to happen if Carrick is to stay, the point that you made about the media. But it's almost like this season, and he's admitted as well that this group of players, or at least up until January, were the best group, better than the Chuba Akpom and Archer squad. This is the best group of Middlesbrough players that he's had at his disposal. And yet he still couldn't get any kind of consistency or stop them throwing games away when you're 3-1 up, or, you know, failing to break a team down at home. And yeah, okay, he can't account for Senny Dieng coming and wiping out Matt Clark against Portsmouth, but then basically just failing to create anything for the remainder of the game. And I think that's my real frustration. And to be fair, more so, I almost kind of mentally checked out from the football. It still doesn't make it any less frustrating, but going on to the point that I wanted to make and that you did touch on, if Michael Carrick is going to continue, then a member of the backroom team or the media staff in the club need to say, right, we're 3 seasons or 2.5 seasons down the line now. At the kind of peak of he needs to go, which was that run of 6 games, the way, and in the run-in as well, the way that he's dealt with the media, as you say, has been nothing short of disgusting. If he is to continue next season, someone needs to basically lay it out in simple terms and say, you cannot continue with the my players can do no wrong. There's no issues at all here. Like, this football club, and not just this football club, football fans, especially modern football fans, are not stupid. There is some really, really intelligent people that analyze games, people that, and yes, there's always going to be probably a vocal minority that are just, this is bad, I can't even put a reason to it, but it's rubbish and we're getting beat. But gone are the days of like being able to say things and basically back it up with, well, you know, I'm Michael Carrick and I'm Middlesbrough manager. And yes, he's achieved 1,000,000 times more than what I ever will on a football pitch and what most Middlesbrough fans in that stadium will week in, week out. But we aren't stupid. You can't pull the wool over our eyes and say, you know, like, what's the issue? Kelechi's got loads of quality, and then drop him the next game. It simply, we're at the stage now where it does not wash. It really doesn't. So as I say, next season, if Carrick is going to stay, and it may just be his persona, we need to see not only on the pitch an obvious change and a bit of flexibility, but a bit of flexibility with Michael Carrick being a little bit more honest. Because if we, and this is my concern, if he stays in 10 games into next season, when I'm sure again Steve Gibson will have invested, and that'll bring me on to our next point of discussion, recruitment in the summer and what needs to change in that sense. If we're not even 10 games, 5 games into next season, and you're yet again seeing late substitutions in games, you're seeing teams come to the Riverside and basically just camp out until we give them a goal, then he comes out after games and says, yeah, there was so many good things in the performance. We're bitterly disappointed. If I hear the phrase bitterly disappointed in the beginning 5 games of next season and he's still in charge, I'm just going to immediately just switch off the radio. BBC Tees is going off. And that is my real concern, that we could be almost bring a load of players in. And I know the point of being the head coach is it's interchangeable. So even if we sign a load of players, then it's going to be for the benefit of the football club and the squad and not necessarily specific to one manager. But I just feel like we'll have wasted so much time, because how we were hamstrung this season by a slow start. We were hamstrung in the season where, to be fair, it was Carrick's good doing that got us chasing down Sheffield United, but Wilder's start of the season effectively wrote off any chance of chasing Sheffield United down effectively. Last season, we were dreadful again and missed out on the playoffs by a relatively small number of points. But again, the start was dreadful. I'm not saying that we need to be unbeaten for the first 10 games of next season, but there's now, because of the time that he's the longest serving manager in the Championship. There's now a level of expectation that is still there, and which was there this season, but also, this season, had we have started slow, which we did, there was a level of kind of, Carrick still got a load of credit in the bank. I think he's back at zero now, potentially even going into the minuses of terms of, if you look at his credit in his Carrick-ometer, then I think it's slightly verging on zero to going into the minus. So if we start next season and then no change, he goes, and then you think, why did we delay this? And that's my real concern, because I don't want to waste another season. It was 9 years ago that Middlesbrough got promoted out of the Championship. This point of the season now, or this point of Middlesbrough Football Club's history, we've now been in, once we start next season, we'll have been in the Championship for longer than what we were when we got relegated under Gareth Southgate up until we got promoted with Vitor Karanka. Now, call me kind of spoilt. I mean, I've certainly not been spoiled as a Middlesbrough fan. My first season ticket was the first season back in the Championship. I've seen the Ishmael Millers of the world and the Chris Killins and Gordon Strachan's football. And you, for the most part, have seen exactly the same. But we can't just continue to languish in the Championship. We've got to. I think it's not like overly optimistic to say that Middlesbrough should be getting in the playoffs most seasons. I don't think that's kind of some ridiculous sort of Arsenal fan mentality where I think we should win everything, even though we've not basically won anything in years. I think that's a pretty realistic kind of position to be in as a fan. We've kind of gone around this topic long enough, and I think we've both made some very good points. So now, in terms of going forward, if nothing is to change, I think personally I'd like to see a bit of a change in the backroom staff, whether that's a little bit of grey hair, whether that's just a couple of coaches with higher pedigree. Look, it's impossible for us to say that Aaron Danks is the reason why Middlesbrough aren't as free-flowing. It's literally impossible. We don't watch training every day. But I think it's obvious to see on that bench that there's, and I don't mean to sound disrespectful here, but an obvious lack of quality in terms of just purely coaching games and coaching a little bit of flexibility tactically. I think there's an obvious deficiency there. So if Carrick is going to stay, and I think, would you agree that we probably need to see a change, a visible change in the backroom staff?
Possibly. I don't want to get too sort of drawn up on it because, as you say, we don't necessarily know who offers what in that backroom staff. Obviously, Woodgate's been a coach previously.
That went well.
Did go well, but was also a coach elsewhere at Bournemouth, where he got them into the playoffs. He's been in and around it. Leadbitter's been in and around the kids at the training ground.
I think it may have been 18s, and then obviously Graham Carrick as well. His background is academy football. But I look at Coventry's bench, for example, and I see Joe Edwards alongside Frank Lampard. Now, yes, okay, you could say, well, Jonathan Woodgate's had a job in the Championship, and yes, he failed. He failed at Millwall ultimately, but had a certain pedigree of being a coach and having an idea of tactics, different formations, coaching players. And some coaches are more suited to being a member of a backroom team rather than the main man. You know, you see it with Eddie Howe and Jason Tyndall. I know he gets a load of stick, but Jason Tyndall, it's not Nathan Jones, Graham Jones at Newcastle as well. He had a shot at Luton and that didn't go well. But I think personally, it might just be my preference, but I would like to see a bit of quality added to that coaching staff, or at least some different kind of experience. Discussed this, funnily enough, a while back, but when Carrick got the job and there was a bit of a umming and ahhing about whether he was going to take it, whether he wasn't, all of the coaches and kind of his reported right-hand man were all coaches, Mike Phelans, Rennie Mullensteins, all of the people that we kind of wanted and ultimately we didn't get or just didn't come to fruition, were all people with slightly more experience. And Carrick's not a rookie anymore. He's the longest serving manager in the Championship. Okay, in terms of his coaching career, but it's not like it's his first season anymore. So I think there needs to be a little addition there, hopefully, in my opinion. In terms of the, I guess, off-field situation and recruitment and the higher ups, even Steve Gibson, and it still involves Michael Carrick, but I guess that buzzword, the model, in terms of if Michael Carrick is going to be the front man, the head coach, and that's, someone that's just going to pick his teams, pick the formations, and do coaching day in, day out. I know that's like incredibly kind of like brushing it to one side and simplifying it. I'm aware that that's not just the role of the head coach, but if we just go in terms of people that you see in the stands wearing suits, what needs to change and what have we got wrong this year in terms of recruitment, in terms of player sales, in terms of potentially investment into the playing staff? If Michael Carrick is going to be that point that doesn't move, then how would you like to see us approach the summer?
I would like us to approach the summer by signing players that are ready for the here and now. I do not want to see Sammy Silvera, Alex Gilbert, Micah Hamilton, 3 players brought in the last couple of windows in which they've been brought in for something like a combined £4 or £5 million between the lot of them, and they all currently can't play football in League One because they're not ready yet. That's a waste of money. At this moment in time, that is a waste of money for a team that has aspirations of being a team that can push the playoff boundary. That money could be much better invested in signing some players with a little bit of look. I'm not saying that they have to have played 200 championship games and be 26 and be ready to play now and be hitting their prime now. You can sign players that, like Conway, you pay a little bit out for, who is a young player but still has experience at the level, has scored double figures in his 2 previous seasons before coming here. And there you've signed a player that you can develop by giving him game time at this level because he's already ready to play now. And look, if he scores another 15 goals next season and we don't go up or go into the playoffs, you'll have teams in the Premier League coming in and saying, yeah, we'll have him and we'll pay you 10 million quid. And all of a sudden, there's your model. You've signed a player, you've developed them whilst also still getting a return on your investment. And then you can flog them for as much as you like. You look at a couple of the sort of moves that teams in and around us make, like Coventry, for example. I think that us and Coventry are probably joined at the hip, as all fans joke about. But in terms of squad building, I look at what they're doing, and I think that they are currently a step ahead of us in the way that they've built their squad. You look at the drop off in midfielders to the backup midfielders. It's not massive really, and in January they ignored the signings of the summer in which they made, which were Mason Clark, young promising winger from League One, Dovin, the goalkeeper, young promising goalkeeper from abroad. And they just went, right, what do we need to get us to the next level now? We'll go and sign a captain from a team languishing in mid-table in the championship in Grimes, and look at the difference it's made. Stick him in midfield, and all of a sudden you have a little bit of experience, a little bit of know-how in there that can stand up and show some character in a game. And look where it's brought them to. Again, we're in a situation where we need to sign a lot of players really to have an overhaul, not just of the squad but of the 11, which is a real shame that it's gone back round full circle without anything that has necessarily been achieved. But we are where we are. I think that we're in another situation where we're having a rebuild once again, which
I
should be
hate that word. I'm sick of it, Nathan. I
But
think,
but do you think so? Just
yeah, sorry, go
before
ahead.
we move on to the awards, Chris, I'll put it to you. Do you think this squad, including manager, playing staff, and manager, do you think we need a reset or a rebuild, or do you think that
What, in terms of personnel or
in terms of
what,
personnel,
everything?
personnel and manager, or one of each?
I think you've probably got the manager. I would personally make a change. That's my preference, because I think in terms of just leadership values, seeing out games, then yes, I think there's a lot of good things that Michael Carrick's brought to this football club, but personally, I think that needs a reset or revamp in terms of the coaching staff. In terms of personnel, I think you've got probably 6, 7 players that I would be happy going into next season with, that you could pin your hopes on to build round. I think any team really, if you've got probably more than half of an 11 that you are content with, if they were on the team sheet first game of next season, then I don't know, do you call that a revamp? If you're adding sort of 5, 6, 7 bodies, yeah, you probably do. So I guess yes would be the answer. We do, but there's certainly quality that we already have. We just need to supplement that quality. I think what, just finishing off on the recruitment point of view before we do get into these daft awards, what I think is a non-negotiable now, and a wider point about some of the criticism I see of Kieran Scott. We now know, and yes, you can say it's a bit of a hatchet job. You can say it's convenient that these noises are coming out. Michael Carrick undoubtedly had more control, or at least a bigger say in what went on in January. Now, it might be a bit of a blame game. It could be false. From information that we receive and people that I would be confident who would kind of know what, may or may not have been somewhat the narrative, which was actually the case. I think it's, well, even in the signings, Giles Edmondson, it's clear to see that Michael Carrick got way more of what he wanted rather than potentially the type of signings that we've made in the summer. I don't think that Michael Carrick had a Scooby-Doo who Aidan Morris was going into the summer transfer window, but the recruitment staff went to him and said, we found someone that we think that you're going to love. And ultimately, I think they've done a very good job in that sense. Carrick has, for me, and of course he will have somewhat of a say, but the recruitment for this club to function, let the recruitment and Kieran Scott do their job. Carrick yes, okay, he's probably going to have somewhat of the final say, or a very big, in terms of character, in terms of what type of personality the player might have, where he sees fitting in his team, if he's going to stay, that is, then yeah, okay, he's going to have to be consulted. You can't just present to him 6 players on day 1 of pre-season and say, there you go, get on with that. But I don't want any like crossover or wires being tangled of Michael Carrick being involved. Let the recruitment staff do what they have been good at, and that is, in fairness, picking out gems. And there's been some big failures. I'm not disregarding that at all. I think one criticism that I would potentially level at Kieran Scott, and I did see it mentioned this week on social media, is ability to pick a diamond out the rough is, you'd have to say, because of the way that this club is functioning, we've become more or less sustainable financially because of him. So he deserves phenomenal praise because of that. Because like I said last week, we certainly weren't sustainable when Neil Warnock was bringing in Uche Ikpeazu with no resell on value, and he was absolutely dreadful, let's be honest. I know you had a weird soft spot for him, but regardless, Kieran Scott needs to be a squad builder this summer. Like you said, he needs to add options, different profiles of a squad that is going to be robust and interchangeable enough that when it gets to January, we're not going to see wholesale changes. I think yet again this summer, we'll see one big sale at the very minimum, which is probably going to be Hayden Hackney. So replacing him is a big enough task anyway. So that's kind of one point just on recruitment. Let them do that. And again, I would like to see Kieran Scott be a little bit more open. I would potentially, when this big investigation into what went wrong, I would like to see a bit of transparency again. I think the club were getting that really, really right. And it's easy. Of course, it's easy for Kieran Scott to come out after Rav Vandenberg flourishing and say, well, yeah, we picked him up for a snip and he picked us over Borussia Dortmund and Juventus. But this is probably the first time where the jury's been a little bit out, and you can put the blame at Carrick's door and say he had more of a say. But ultimately, if Carrick's picking the players that he wants, then the recruitment staff should say no. And I used the example of Salah last week and Liverpool and Klopp, but they should have enough in that to say, no, we disagree and we think this is the better fit for the football club. And yeah, I'd just like to see the money that we've spent, we've sold. I'd like to see it used. And I know that sounds like a bit of a spoiled brat thing to say and a bit of an obvious thing to say, but I want a little bit of ambition, to be honest. I want Steve Gibson to put his money where his mouth is and say, don't come out and do an interview where he says, yeah, we're going to smash the league, but give us no excuses to kind of, and football fans will always come up with excuses, but I think in terms of the profile, it kind of goes hand in hand. It's woven in together in terms of the type of players that we sign and the age profile of players that we sign. I want that to be, I've given you this pot of money and you've gone out and you've bought players that are basically, those signings scream, we aren't messing about. And it's okay to have a mix. I'm sure there'll be a few names that crop up and we go, who is that? But I think, like we said last time, we need killers in this division. So that's the way that I want the recruitment staff to go down. And
not Kellers.
No, not definitely not Kellers. And for God's sake, just don't. If Victor Orta rings you during the summer, just block his number. Don't pick the phone up. Just say, Victor, you caused enough bother last time. Can you piss off, mate? And that can be that. Let's move on and let's have a bit of a laugh and a bit of a reflection. So to end the Boropolis podcast for this season, I've got 4 awards: Player of the Season, Goal of the Season, and then 2 awards which I come up with on the spot this morning. I've already consulted with Nathan. Two phrases that we've used an awful lot throughout this season have been the "we are back" and also "we are dead." So what I'm going to pick as the kind of two out there awards, which are very much exclusive to the Boropolis podcast, the "We Are Back" award, which was a moment in the season. It can be a high point. It can be a high point which proved to be, nonsensical, really. It could be a signing. It could be a specific moment where you think, yeah, that was the point in this season where I thought, yeah, we're back. We are going to go and produce something good, and we're going to go and get promoted, or we're going to get in the playoffs. The "We Are Dead" award, just for a laugh, can be just your lowest point this season where you thought, what on earth are we doing? And just really kind of the point where you thought, yeah, this is Middlesbrough Football Club for you. What have we managed to do here? How have we got ourselves in this situation? Could be a result, could be one of the numerous times where we chucked away points. So I think we're not really going against the grain here. We're agreeing with the supporters' decision in terms of the official award. But player of the season, Boropolis is player of the season. Are we in agreement that it would be the star boy? I don't want your bottom lip to start going here because he's going to leave. Hayden Hackney, Nathan.
Yeah, all day. Yeah, he's been fantastic all season. It was nice this season, after last particularly, that Hayden didn't necessarily miss out too many games this season. Yeah, he's top drawer, isn't he? Brilliant in his first season. Last season, as mentioned, struggled with injuries, but this season again just returned back to form, and he's been brilliant. The most progressive passes out of any player in Europe, which
Yeah, I
that,
don't
that
know. I don't know about you, but as much as that Inter Milan Barcelona game was one of the best football matches I've ever watched, every time that Pedri got the ball, all I could think was, "You're amazing, but you don't play as many progressive passes as Hayden Hackney."
yeah, quite literally, he's on a platform of his own in that sense of getting us up the pitch and getting us on the front foot. I think for the most part, he's fantastic receiving the ball with his back to goal and knowing what's around him, being savvy in the press, really. And he's chipped in with a good few goals as well this season, which has been nice. But yeah, he's our player of the season. I think I'll echo everything that you're about to say, Chris. But yeah, he's been top.
Yeah, I think the thing is for me with Hackney, and there's been a few of them over the years, like a similar kind of feeling that ultimately I guess I was proven wrong with. But in the season in the Premier League, I watched Ben Gibson and I thought, this isn't a good side, but you're better than this. And I think truthfully, had he have not stayed for the following season, he probably would have went to Southampton and Everton and really kicked on. I think waiting kind of killed him and killed his momentum. And anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that I watched a relatively poor group of players and thought, yeah, you're better than this. You can go somewhere else and have a really good career. It's been the same for Hayden Hackney with me. And there's been other good players, notable mentions. I think Tommy Conway has been an excellent addition. Finn Azaz, purely just for the numbers. I know I've criticised him a lot, but it's really impressive, the numbers that he's put up this season. But Hayden Hackney is the one player where I watch Middlesbrough and think, I'm not narrow-minded enough to think, yeah, he sometimes has like lapses of concentration where he'll just zing a pass out to their fullback, and I'm like, for God's sake, what are you doing? But I just think if you plonk him in I don't know, Adam Wharton's getting all kinds of praise for Crystal Palace, and there's areas like off the ball that I think he needs to improve. But I think Hayden Hackney is unfortunately outgrowing this Middlesbrough squad, and I wish him all the best. And yeah, those tears at full time at Coventry.
Yeah, not great at all with it to watch. And yeah, I think Hayden, for his consistency this season, wins it. I think Doak would have ran him close if
Yeah,
he was fit
yeah.
for longer. But yeah, for consistent level of performance, it has to be Hayden, really.
Goal of the season?
Goal of the season, Chris. I think I already know yours because you told me it like 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's Tommy Conway away at Blackburn. I think that won the official award as well. Do you know what? Ironically, I'd said Neto Borges the week prior, and then flip flopped and changed my mind a week later. But yeah, it's Bergkamp-esque. The finish on his left foot. I guess the moment, it was so quick in the game that we sprung it on Blackburn. Phenomenal knee slide. Tommy Conway, as much as it's frustrating when he's chasing down the ball boy when we're getting beat and he's kind of drifting out wide and getting a little bit bored of not having any service, he's an infectious character by all accounts. And yeah, I think he's a very good footballer as well. So yeah, Blackburn away, that Tommy Conway turn and hit in front of the Sky cameras would be my pick.
I've got one that was standing out to me in my mind because it was relatively recently, which was Neto against Oxford. I think it was a good team move. One that also I really enjoyed was very early on in the season, Hayden Hackney's goal against Stoke, where he had a shot from about 25 yards out and picked out the top corner. I thought it was a terrific finish and showed us exactly what he can do. He had one last season as well, didn't he, against Huddersfield, where he just picked out the top corner, but a little bit more central this time. I thought he did really well to shimmy away from a defender, set himself, and yeah, he beat the immovable force Victor Johansson as well. So that's a real plus point for that goal. So yeah, those two I enjoyed. I think I'll go with Hackney's just because it has a little bit more pizzazz on it rather than Neto's little flick.
Right, okay. So the big ones now. The Do you want to go We Are Back or We Are Dead first?
Go We Are Dead first.
Right, we'll end on a positive. So I'll let you go first.
I think there's certainly a couple
There's plenty. There
that
is
can be
plenty.
there's a couple that can be shortlisted. I think one of my in fact I'll just reel a couple off for you of the We Are Deads.
Right.
First of all, the 3-3, the Sheffield Wednesday game, the capitulation. Sat here on a Saturday evening, you being on a flight to Dublin, and news filtering through that we were signing Kelechi Iheanacho. We were definitely dead, and it felt at the time that we were dead. And the fact that we came on this podcast and gave it, oh, it might be all right.
I mean, in fairness, I know it might be described as sitting on the fence. We did say it's two ways. There's no in between. It'll be an absolute masterstroke or it'll be a disaster. And we were proven somewhat right in the fact that it wasn't a disaster.
I think we
In fact, can I just say that, like, the actual I've got my, just you touching on that, my We Are Dead moment was actually just the Sky camera panning to Kelechi Iheanacho in his kit and just thinking, what have we signed here? And what has he been eating in Sevilla for 6 months?
yeah, it wasn't great at all, was it? Seeing him, and look, he looked the same on Saturday last week as well. So nothing changed over the 4 months, despite his Instagram training clips during the international break.
Yeah.
So yeah, those two definitely stand out. However, Sunderland at home debacle.
It's been such an odd season, really. Ultimately failure, but there has been some funny moments, I guess. Right, okay, let's wrap up because I feel like we've been recording for 3 days here with the We Are Back awards. I'm gonna go to you first because A, I need a little bit further time to think, and B, I already know what yours is. So go ahead, just talk us through that interaction.
Yeah, it's sort of that whole day,
Yeah,
really.
yeah.
The travelling down to Oxford, 2 wins on the spin, international break, thinking, come on, if you go there and get a result, win the game, then you're right in and amongst it. Going 1-0 down in the game, and in the end, it was a top day out. Laugh, hat trick in front of the away end. The Finnazaz worldy performance of the season. I think he scored two on the day and did he set up two or three? I can't remember. And Tommy Conway off the bench as well. It was like a perfect away performance, all wrapped up really, hitting six on the road, really nice. Driving home, buzzing with the 3 points, and then in the service station with Ryan Giles, who was over the moon to see Boro fans as his Hull City side had been beaten away at Luton that day, and saying to him, "We'll see you in January, Ryan." And we did. And it hasn't gone the way that we hoped it would, but seeing his face when I said that to him and then posting the photo of me and him on Twitter afterwards, and just seeing the Borough fans in a joyous mood, flooding the likes, flooding the comments. I remember being stood outside the bus after getting the photo with him, ringing you saying, "You just won't believe what's happened." And yeah, that was my we are back moment of the season, because we were officially back at that moment in time.
My we are back moment, to be honest, it's well, you could say it's a serious one, you could say it's a soppy one, and there is a bit of humour to add. So obviously earlier on this season, I spoke about the fact that my dad has gone through some really difficult times with his health. So obviously early part of the season, to be honest, I missed a lot of the games at the Riverside. Went to the opening day of the season. Obviously, even though with season tickets, etc., it just didn't feel right, to be honest, to go to the Riverside without him. And yeah, just I think it was, well, I know it was October, returning to the Riverside with my dad after everything that he's been through, and just thinking, God, we've been through a lot, but we've got our Saturday back, only to then be beaten 2-0 off Bristol City. So, as I say, the moment, the beautiful moment of we're back. I've got my best pal back at the football, seeing you that day. Obviously, your family and mine shook hands, said, "You know what, Martin, it's great to see you," all this and that. And then, yeah, we just done the typical Borough thing. We couldn't have won that day. We just got turned over by Bristol City instead. So, yeah, that was my moment. It's been a season of ups and downs, really, both for, I guess, in life and in terms of Middlesbrough Football Club. But another enjoyable season doing the podcast, Nathan. And yeah, I would say I wouldn't change it for the world. I would. Could we have not just done a Leeds this season and got promoted, had a little wobble, and then just had a big weekend celebrating in Plymouth? That would have been quite nice. But yeah, to finish up on, I'm not going to kind of go on a big waffly speech, but just again, as always, a huge thank you to anyone that's watched and listened. As always, I find it a bit bizarre, even though that we do this podcast, that people enjoy it, listen to it on their commute. We get messages saying, "When's the podcast out?" And I'm kind of like, you know, why are you in such a rush to hear what me and Nathan have to think? But yeah, as always, as annoying as it's been throughout this seasoning at times, it's always a good laugh and a good opportunity to just vent, to be honest, Nathan. So thank you for everyone that's watched and listened.
Yeah, it's been another long old season, really. I think when you have seasons like we did 2 seasons ago, Carrick's first, coming on here, it is just incredible to talk about your team playing really well and winning games. It is easy to come on and talk about that. But at times this season, we've came on here and had to talk about defeat after defeat after defeat, and talk about difficult things like the manager possibly being sacked, changes of backroom staff as we've done today. It's like serious topics, really, that you don't necessarily want to have to talk about. But yeah, sometimes it can feel like a chore to have to talk about those things. But we've marched through it, we've plodded through it, hopefully without being too disrespectful, but also by giving our opinions as best as we possibly can. I don't know why, but I'm actually really looking forward to next season already. I
God,
really am,
Nathan.
Chris, I am.
Nathan, do you know what? You need your head checking. you've just ranted about this squad for an hour, and now you're excited. What do you think the summer's got in store? Plenty of transfer news.
I think when those fixtures come out in a couple of weeks' time, I
You've
think they
got
come
that
out
retained list to
mull
weep.
over.
Yeah, weep at when, I'm not going to say it, he's going to get another contract.
I'm looking forward to fixture release day, knowing that we will be probably at home to Stoke on opening day, and I'm looking forward to
Fresh in our Castor, or rumoured to be Castor kit.
fresh in our Castor kit that's fallen apart before the season's began, and get me back in that Riverside with Morgan Whittaker launching balls in the top corner, because then I can come on here first week of August with a new squad developed, first win of the season, and we will officially be back. 100 point Reds
right,
next season.
right. Let's wrap it up there before you really say something ridiculous. I think that alone is ridiculous. But yes, I'm going to leave it there. As I say, our bread and butter, Boropolis, probably for what it's most known, will be on the ball as best as we can on the transfer front.
We could be back.
Yeah, we could be. So yeah, you've got that to look forward to as well. Obviously, it probably should be said, if from the end of this review we do get a change of manager, we're gonna have to come back and discuss that. But yeah, we'll wait and see for the next few weeks at least. But yeah, thanks ever so much for everyone for watching, listening. As always, please do leave us a comment, a like, subscribe if you wish. And also on audio platforms, you can rate and review the podcast. So thanks again. I won't bore you any longer. That's been another episode and another season ticked off of the Boropolis podcast.